Well, hello and welcome to what is the 163rd episode of the A&F podcast with me, Al Coates, and him,
Scott Casson-Rennie. Nearly
And
did it again,
today-
didn't you? Nearly did
Nearly
it again.
did what? Did what?
A&F podcast. We've rebranded. Al doesn't get rebranding, you see, so,
I can start again if you want.
no, it's fine. Leave it
Right,
in.
okay. Well, we've also got someone else in the room today. We've got Emily Frith.
Emily the Fifth. Sound
Emily
like
the
King
Fifth.
Charles III.
It's been a long week. I've been in too many Zoom meetings with you. We've got Emily Frith, the CEO of Adoption UK. So, hello, Emily.
Hello, thanks for having me on.
You're very welcome.
Well, thank you for coming on, because not everyone wants to, It's probably like is it part of your job description, the thing you have to do?
Yeah, it's written in the fine print.
Yeah, whether you like it or not, you have to come. Well, thank you so much for coming on. If you're okay to bear with us for a couple of minutes, we're going to do a little bit of an update, because we were in a meeting today, and I think it's probably worthwhile us giving a little update. We were at the Department for Education, weren't we, Scott?
Not physically. We weren't actually in the Department for Education.
Or-
We were on a webinar thingy-mabob with the Department. I'm just being specific with this, because
Okay, then I'm not
I don't
sure
know,
that
I
level
just-
of detail is that important.
I think it is. To be
Right,
honest,
okay.
I think it is.
Right, okay, this
Before-
is great. This is podcast gold, this, isn't
it's
it?
amazing stuff. This, yeah. Anyway,
Right, okay.
we were at an online meeting with the DFE. That's what you should have said, but whatever.
Right, okay, well, in this spirit of criticism and complaint, we were there, which is every 4 months we go there, and it kind of brings together a whole range of different people from adoption, specifically adopters, but from different regions, different experiences, different stages in the process. And we go up to the DFE and we discuss issues that they have raised and issues that we want to talk about, like having liaised and communicated with the community. So, Scott, what were we talking about today?
So just to rewind back, another error you made there. It's every 3 months, not every 4 months. These details are really important, and you've clearly had a very long week, because you're not normally as bad for details as you are today. So, what did we talk about today?
I think I'd have gotten away with it if you hadn't mentioned, to be honest with you. I think, yeah, just get on with it, man. Honestly.
Oh dear. Do you know what? I have had one of those days today. That's just made me a little bit too pedantic.
This does not bode well for me. I think.
No, it doesn't.
You're
doesn't.
fine, Emily. It's just everybody else that gives them away today. So what was today? I'm just trying to think. So we talked about contact, the umbrella
yes.
contacting term that we don't like. And we really went into quite a lot of detail about that, actually, because we broke it down into the letterbox system, direct contact, social media contact, sibling contact. So we were talking about all these kind of bits that are covered under contact. I'm trying to think what we talked about the disruption report that's being looked at the moment.
Yeah, it's doing the rounds, isn't it?
Doing the rounds, yeah. We talked about that. What was interesting about that really was that the DFE and the RAs are actively looking at the report and actively kind of thinking, wow, okay. Because we know Julie Selwyn did her research back in 2015, was it 2014, I think?
14, yeah.
Yeah. So, and you know what? That's still that is the last time that we've really kind of focused in on that in terms of research and stuff. And I think that it needs to come up again, because actually I think families are braver now. I think that perhaps the figures are maybe a little bit changed around a little bit. I mean, they will have done anyway, but I'm thinking, back when Julie Selwyn did her report, it was everybody was too scared to say how things really were. Well, not everybody, but some people would have been too frightened.
It was pre-ASF, the whole
regionalisation,
Martinary adoptions are all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So really interesting. And I think it's probably good to flag up that on Wednesday next week, which should be the 3rd of May, we're going to have the author or the editor of that report to come on.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to do a webinar on Wednesday night, 8:00. And we've got some other things to do across that, because I think it's a really important conversation. I mean, in some ways, I feel like it's a bit of a sensitive topic having Adoption UK in the room, because of the bad experience of actually speaking out and how that was received. But But anyway, we'll not open that can of worms.
No, let's not. No,
Let's not open that can of worms. Not tonight.
Not
So that's
just to say, I did get sent the report that you're doing the webinar on, and I thought it was really, really powerful, and really interesting how much the experiences in the report was similar to the research that Julie Selwyn did, and a little bit of, well, things haven't changed despite things like the ASF. And it was, I think it's really, really impactful, and it's really good to hear that REAs and others are taking it seriously.
Yeah, so it feels like it's sort of just caught a moment and it's really rolling. And I know that it's getting into some really interesting corners, which maybe we'll find out a bit more about next week and what hopefully the next steps are. But so it was a really good meeting. But let's not dwell on that because we've got such an interesting guest. Let's use our time wisely. Yeah. So hello, Emily.
And I was thinking as well, like, I wanted to say new CEO, but you're not new anymore, are you? You've been there.
I'm going to claim I'm new for several years.
Yeah, new.
Been here about 6 months, since October.
Yeah, so it's taken us this long to get you on, but I mean, we always give you a couple of weeks to settle in before we contact Jack and say, right, Jack. But it's interesting because we've had the third CEO we've had on since podcast. So we had Hugh on, we've had Sue on a couple of times. We've had Hugh on a couple of times as well. So this is your first time, so we'll treat you gently for your first time, I'm sure. But you're also the first one that's not been my boss, so this is great.
Yeah. And I have to say that the only sad thing is that I think we had this conversation that if it had been Hugh, Sue, and Emmy Lou, that would have been wonderful. But it's Emily, so you are
not allowed to rename me.
Right, we're not going to We're not going to rename you because we've tried that in the past and it works out really badly.
Yeah, it does. Yeah,
So
it doesn't work. It doesn't stick either. It doesn't. It doesn't
stick. It doesn't stick. Yeah. So I guess can I start a little bit before and can you explain to me a little bit your background and history and kind of what led you to the front door of Adoption UK?
Yeah, absolutely. So most recently before this role, I was working for the Children's Commissioner for England. So for those of your listeners who don't know what that is, it's basically the Commissioner is the voice of children across England. So she has a particular remit around children in social care. So I used to run our helpline, Help at Hand, which was an advocacy service for children in care. So much broader remit, looking at children with mental health issues, children in care, children's voice. And then before that, I did a lot of work in young people's mental health and then mental health generally, and previously worked for a sort of social care charity looking at adult social care. And I guess the thing that I find most that I get angry about most is children, young people, but also adults not getting the help that they need, and particularly because they don't fit in particular boxes. So, like, the NHS does what it says on the tin, but if you've got sort of social care needs, often that's where you don't get the right help. And so Adoption UK appealed to me because it's all about campaigning for adopted people to get support. And I was looking for an organisation where there was a sort of campaigning element, because that's my background. I've kind of come from a sort of policy and comms background, but also a direct services element too. So I wanted that combination. Adoption UK just seemed like the perfect place to come and try and sort of have an impact.
Oh, thank you. I guess my follow-up question to that is, I'm really conscious that adoption is in a very peculiar place. It's had its day in the sun, very much so, and it feels like the sun is sort of shining in different places now. And so, it's maybe a big question, but is it odd picking up a charity after a sort of a decade of real focusing on adoption? And was that part of your thinking? Well, where are we at with adoption, and why Adoption UK now?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting time to join. I think there hasn't been enough focus in the past on things like kinship care, and also keeping families together and more support for sort of families before, when social care first gets involved. And I absolutely agree with that direction of travel. I think it's important.
Yeah,
but I also think that we don't want to lose the sort of the breadth of focus on social care. So I think we need to think about children with care experience in the round, rather than trying to always think about the legal ways that we kind of parcel people up. And I'm really keen to work with the whole care sector and with care experienced people to think about this as a whole and all push for change rather than sort of thinking, well, we need our sort of bit of the pie. That makes sense.
Yeah. So Scott and I are probably going to fight over opportunities to ask you questions. So Scott, if you feel, you'll have to butt in if you want to get past me.
What's new?
So what was your pitch to Adoption UK? Because I would imagine they'll have said, well, they'll have said, right, why do you want the job and what you're going to do with Adoption UK? Or can I ask you what if you can give your answer or a version of your answer? I'm not
a version of it. Yeah,
this isn't like a public interview. It's not like the people's choice.
I guess I wanted to sort of point out my history of like sort of policy impact. So I used to work on children's mental health, and I think I can sort of demonstrate that I've had an impact on policy. One of the things I once did was ran a campaign called Equality for Mental Health, which was about trying to get the government at the time to invest in mental health. And so we had loads of celebrities sign up to a big campaign, as sort of Ruby Wax and Alan Rickman and Mumford and Sons and huge numbers of celebrities, the Archbishop of Canterbury, and we all put together a big campaign, got on the news, and in the autumn statement that year, the Chancellor announced 600 million for mental health. So I kind of pointed, I was highlighting some of my like greatest hits, that kind of thing, and what I said before about why I was interested to try and kind of make a difference both to the kind of operational stuff, which I'd done before in working on helpline and policy and campaigning work. So I was kind of putting out like why I was interested. And then in terms of what I want to do with Adoption UK, we did talk about, and I'm sure you're going to want to ask me about this, did talk about what more we could do with it for adopted people. So I think the board are really interested in that anyway. Adoption UK have been kind of moving in that direction anyway. And it was something I was really interested in. In particular, I'm interested in children's voice. So kind of the child's perspective on adoption. And kind of, I think the board in particular and everyone else at Adoption UK is really interested in sort of the voice of adopted adults as well and adult adoptees. But I guess I've got a particular interest in kind of listening to children's voices and how you do that well.
And I mean, it's I guess my question is, and I'm thinking about some of the stuff that we see publicly about, adopted adults and what have you. Is that within your lane? As in Adoption UK's lane, or I'm asking this quite cheekily because when I worked at Adoption UK, we started to look at things like that, but not in any great detail. And certainly, we didn't have the funds to be able to do that back then because that was pre-Tessa and all that sort of stuff. Is it, is that something that is within Adoption UK's lane, or is it something that is kind of tentatively, let's. Do you know what I'm trying to say? Like, is it something that we should maybe dabble in and see what happens, or is it, is it something that comes with a lot of kind of pre-warning about how it works and all that sort of stuff, or is it just like let's crack on and do it?
I think it's a really interesting question. I think people have quite strong views on that. So I guess Adoption UK has always been for adopted people. It's just the focus has been through the lens of adopters. Like when it was set up, it was adopters who were saying we recognise that our children are not getting the right support, and we don't think everyone else recognises that. We want to get together and support each other and campaign on that. So that's always been kind of the history. I think probably in the last few years, maybe 5 years or so, I think starting in Wales, we've started to do work with adopted children and young people. And I think partly because I've talked to some of our directors across the nations, and it's come from sort of as the children who have been supported by the charity have grown up and become teenagers and young people, they've said, well, we want something for us. Like we want to be having peer support groups for adopted young people. So we sort of started that in Wales, I think, first of all, and then now we've got services in Scotland, Northern Ireland, and starting in England as well. To get that kind of direct support, so it's not filtered through parents, it's for young people by young people and co-produced with young people, and then so that had already started, and then I think over the last couple of years there's been more of a focus on thinking, okay, what next, what can we do for adopted adult adoptees or adopted people when they're over 18, and so I think it was around the time that I started, just after I started, we launched a membership for adopted people. So that's a really, really new thing and something that was sort of growing. And we're also establishing an advisory group of adopted people, because I think it's really important to do things with adopted people and centre the voices of adopted people. So that's something we are really focused on at the moment. The barometer, I think, for the last few years now has had sort of a survey both of adopters and adopted people over 18. That's been growing, and some of our research now as well. So we did a report about cost of living this year, and it looked at the impact of cost of living on prospective adopters, on families who've adopted and adopted people. And trying to look at adoption from lots of different angles. And we want to increase the number of adopted people who work at AUK, who are on the board of AUK as well. So we're sort of trying to make sure that we're called Adoption UK. I think we feel that needs to mean that we're looking at adoption from lots of perspectives, and it's not just the perspective of adopters. I think we're on a journey. We're not there yet, and partly we want to have an advisory group so that we can be shaping that journey, and that can get us to a place where we're more centering the voices of adopted people.
Yeah.
Can I ask, because as I'm listening to you, totally agree with what you're saying, but what I'm really conscious of is your language, and I can see that I can almost see you very consciously flitting between adopted people and adult adoptees, and and I'm just conscious that sort of reflects perhaps an environment that I've not seen around Adoption UK before, which is, I think, maybe up until 18 months ago, that it was a kind of I'll just get on with it. Just no one's particularly worried, but it feels like it's become a much more. I'm choosing my words carefully, because I think it's easy to characterize it as kind of, people are trolling you, but I think there's a much more nuance around that. There's a lot of people who are not happy with Adoption UK, or there's a lot of adult adoptees not happy with the language of adult adopted people, and I think there's some adopted, and the vice versa. I think that so is that become quite a consuming sort of element of your work, and how you reach out to people, to adult adoptees, and offer them something that they seem to not necessarily want, or some do and some don't. Is that just does it feel really complicated?
I think language is really important, isn't it? And I think that there's a lot of nuance and complexity about language. I think it's not just I could broaden out, because it's like, things like the contact is a really loaded word, isn't it? And people talk about like better ways of describing it. And I think I know that there are groups of adult adoptees who are very strongly the view that they should be described as adult adoptees, and it's their experience, of course. If that's what they want to be called, I will say adult adoptees. But there are also people I've spoken to who would like to be called adopted people. And so I when you're talking more generically about a whole group of people, I like to try and flip between the two, because that way I feel like I'm not excluding a group who don't prefer that terminology. It's a tricky one, because people feel strongly about it, and quite rightly, because they're being described.
Yeah,
and it feels. Sorry, Scott.
No, I was just going to say, I think that we've been going 7 years this year, I think.
No.
And in the start, it was just me and Al banging on about how life was and stuff like that. And as we started to get into the adoptee conversations and started to listen to people actually who have the experience of being adopted, I think that's when we start to realize that language is very important. And like you say, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't sometimes, because how you refer to one person isn't necessarily how 30% of that group feel. So it is a very hard one. But I think you're right. Language is very important, and we just it's like anything, isn't it? When you're trying to change something, you have to use the language that you're going to change with.
Yeah.
So has that made it a much more? And because I occasionally, I follow you on Facebook, I follow you on Twitter, and I see that oftentimes, excuse me, that people are, the comment sections become quite combative over what feel like fairly benign posts. But then I'm seeing what we noticed when we observed this, we put a few posts out about, hey, we've got Emily Frith coming on, and there was no comments. And that is unusual, even in sort of quite what sort of safe corners of the internet, and we just thought, actually, is this shutting down conversation? And is that people who would normally put a comment in and think, oh, I don't want to get into that. I don't want to sort of step into that, bull ring, for the want of a better phrase. It just feels like a really quite a difficult environment for you to get your messaging out.
I think social media is a really difficult environment generally at the moment, and not just in the world of adoption, but definitely in the world of adoption.
Cheers, Elon Musk. Yeah.
Well, yeah. A lot of my Twitter feed now, not in the adoption world, just in general, is quite vitriolic. And I think what the trouble with social media is that that it's not good at nuance, and adoption is full of nuance and complexity and different perspectives and different opinions. So it's hard to have a sensible debate on social media. But also, I think one of the positive things about social media is that voices that haven't always been heard have been heard more. So I've seen over the years working at Children's Commissioner, there's a lot more voices of care experienced people generally. And people, when things aren't right in the world and, there isn't enough support for adopted people out there, then people are rightly angry about that kind of thing. And we're called Adoption UK. So if you don't really agree with adoption generally, then and you have an organisation called Adoption UK, then that's going to create a sort of target potentially. But also, I recognise that we don't always get everything right either, and I think we want to be an organisation that listens and makes changes based on what we hear.
Yeah. So obviously you've been settling in, but there's day-to-day things to be doing as well. So the barometer's coming out soon, is that right?
Yes, yeah, really soon, in May. Really excited about it's the 5th year of the barometer, and what it's doing is kind of looking back at over the last 5 years, trying to think about what's changed, what stayed the same. So there's big section in there about what adopted people think as well, adult adoptees. So yeah, looking forward to that.
Any sneak peeks?
No, couldn't possibly. But I think you had Becky Brooks on last time, didn't you, to talk about it? So hopefully Becky will want to come back and go through all the findings.
We're always conscious that in the run up to the report being released, she's busy typing away or doing whatever it is in her little dungeon somewhere. And then when it's released, she's here, there, and everywhere. So we normally leave her until it's released, and then the first week at least has passed before we say, "You coming on, love?" Because and we always have great banter with Becky, so it's a win-win.
It's such a big report, isn't it? There's just so much in there, and it's so many different aspects of adoption as well. So I think you do need like an hour-long podcast to really go through it all.
Absolutely, yeah. We need to speak to the person that sends out the invites to the launch as well, don't we, Al?
Scott's got harbouring a very bitter grudge.
We'll talk about that once we've finished recording with you, Emily, because Mr. Coates got an invite. Mr. Cass and Rennie didn't get an invite, so not very happy about that as podcasters that need to know what's going
on. Crikey, it's turned into a this is not how it was meant to go down. I'm sorry, Emily.
But there's lots of other good things going on with the day job. So one of the things that's really nice is that post-COVID, we're now being able to bring back a lot more face-to-face events for our members and adopters. So bring things like theme parks and family days and camps and things like that. So I think that's really, really nice to be able to do that kind of thing.
But I think as well, I mean, it's great because I do see them, especially because I know Claire quite well, and I see that she's still amazing. Busy organising everything and everybody. But what I thought was because I think she posted a couple of weeks ago, because obviously Al and I did some webinars during the lockdowns as well for Adoption UK when it was all online. And what's I think interesting is the number of webinars that you've actually gone ahead and done as Adoption UK before your time, I know. But I just hope that will continue. Is that a plan to keep
absolutely.
some stuff online?
We've got over 250 webinars now for our members, so it's it's almost like so much information. So I'm thinking about ways that we can make it easier for people to navigate and find the information. But there's fantastic webinars from experts like Al Coates on there. Lots of different aspects of
I did one as well,
adoption.
but whatever.
I just said that to wind you up.
Someone
And you did it so well.
I can hear
Whole
a voice.
face and everything, straight face and everything.
But lots of and there's webinars now for quite a lot of adopted people as well from different perspectives. So Dilly Carter, who's one of our new ambassadors, done a webinar. We've got lots of information about FASD, which Scott, you'd be really interested in, I'm sure. So yeah, absolutely want to keep the online stuff going because especially we're Adoption UK and people are based all over the country, so not everyone can come to face-to-face events. So we want to kind of have horses for courses, really, things that work.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because I mean this is a historical thing for me, but way back when we were like, how do you do stuff online? And then all of a sudden COVID comes and everything goes online, and it's like, okay, and that's how you do it. Because I have to say that was an impressive kind of change that Adoption UK did. I think we did speak to Sue about it at the time or just after it, but it was certainly a massive thing. So it's great to hear that that's still going to continue, because I think that was one of the biggest complaints really that I used to hear all the time was about being able to access things through the membership that they couldn't get face to face. So it's brilliant, absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, I think it really works for things like diverse groups as well. So we've got sort of groups for single adopters or adopters from diverse backgrounds, Muslim adopters, LGBTQ. So where people might not know somebody who lives locally to them, who has that kind of particular shared characteristic. Now they can have groups online.
Absolutely.
That's working really well.
Yeah, they arranged a day out for all the kids in the Northeast, and it was all, I can see where they went from my window here. So I was like, I kept my head down because I thought if they find out all they're here, they'll all be in for a cup of coffee. So I'm not tipping up for that. But I think
got enough biscuits.
Not enough biscuits. Can I ask then about your lobbying then? Because I think that you sort of said that to strengthen a part of your key skill set. What do you have a checklist or a top 10 priorities wish list of things that you'd like to see in terms of governmental change or guide in terms of legislation, I guess at the extreme, but just policy?
So I think that we've got kind of three main areas that we're sort of interested in terms of policy. One is adoption support, and that's really about making sure that adopted people get support throughout their lives. So that the right support's in place with a sort of a proper assessment of needs right at the beginning of the process, that's kept under review as well. So it's not just right at the beginning and then no one ever looks at something again. And it's multidisciplinary, so we get a really good assessment of needs, and then that support's actually provided, and that goes on, and so that adopted people in adulthood as well get access to therapy when they need it. So there's that adoption support thread. The second one is education, because it comes up time and time again from our adopters that schools are just not recognising the impact of early childhood trauma. They don't send provision isn't good enough in schools. That behaviour policies are impacting on whether children can be included in classrooms. So that's a big theme for us, and trying to change the way the education system approaches care experienced children, but obviously our experience is adoption. And then the third one is health. So things like access to mental health services and FASD and other neurodevelopmental conditions as well. So those are kind of three areas that we're trying to have an impact on. And then we're trying to sort of narrow down our kind of asks underneath that. And obviously the barometer is a really big way in which we try and influence policy. So there's a kind of the key recommendations in that. So contact being one of them, or maintaining good links with family, and wanting better support for everyone involved in contact is a big thing for us as well.
I mean, certainly education is always been an issue that's kind of keeps going, and certain things resolve themselves, but education just doesn't seem to be getting any better, does it?
Yeah, I think the education world is quite politicized at the minute, isn't it? So I think there's a sort of trend for strict behaviour policies and that kind of thing, and sometimes that doesn't recognise the need for an understanding of trauma, and I don't think the sort of evidence, the really strong evidence from things like the UK Trauma Council are filtering through enough to education at the moment.
Yeah.
So you mentioned a few things in it, like adoption support, and I was kind of curious. You mentioned that all the things you mentioned in some ways are sort of already met. Like the assessment of need. So do you have specific, like you said, do you have specific things that you want to see? And are those legislative changes? Because obviously we have an assessment of need, which is a statutory requirement, but then we don't have a statutory duty to meet that. Is that, I mean, that's a really big thing, isn't it? It's a short sentence, but a big thing. So have you got are they really lofty aspirations, or have you got kind of, are you working with, government to try and affect just policy? How does that work?
Yeah. Well, I think legislation-wise, the main thing that's kind of been the big show in town recently has been the care review, and then obviously the response to the care review, which was mildly disappointing, shall we say? So I think that, and it was really disappointing that there wasn't so much of a mention of adoption within that. And obviously we had the adoption strategy and that's being implemented and everything, but if the focus of policy and intention is looking at the whole of social care, I think it needs to involve adoption, because it needs to be that whole landscape, and adoption can't be sort of seen as separate to that. So then obviously trying to make sure that the review did think about adoption. And then I think the next big thing will be what happens in the manifestos, because they have a focus on care and adoption, then that will influence what happens with civil servants and whichever government takes over, because I don't think a huge amount of change will happen between now and the election. I used to work in government, and I know that the Treasury doesn't like to spend any money that you can't really get anything done towards the end. And then what will happen afterwards? There'll be a spending review, and we'll want to see the big decisions made there about what's being spent on care, what goes into things like the Adoption Support Fund. I think those will be the kind of key things, and then potentially there might be a new legislation at some point. There's been some hints around a kinship care strategy. There might be a kinship care, social care bill, and there might be opportunities then to think about what extra duties, what extra rights can we get into law. One of the things that we've been working on lately is about statutory maternity pay, so for adoption pay. So at the moment you can get adoption pay if you are employed, but you can't if you're self-employed.
Yeah.
So we want to try and change the rules that the DWP set out, so that happens as kind of a legal right, as opposed to what happens at the minute, which is that the councils have funding, but it's kind of discretionary and can be means tested. So we've been working on trying to get that changed. So that would be quite a small change in terms of government, but a huge change for self-employed adopters.
Yeah. And I would guess that the numbers aren't massive in terms of self-employed adopters in comparison to other things that would cost a lot of money. So this would be quite a nice little thing to to be able to level up against.
I think so. Make
through
it
adoption
fair.
leave. Yeah.
I think in terms of government spending, it's not a huge amount of money.
Yeah, I maybe shouldn't have used that phrase, because that's not one that I ever wanted to hear when it came out of somebody's mouth. But I guess that's another advantage to you doing the job that you're doing now, because you've got that kind of insider knowledge of how things change obviously, but in terms of the essence of how the inside of government works when it comes to spending, you then know what to focus on now, rather than wasting your time looking at massive big things that are when actually the fact that it's not going to happen. It's just going to be a waste of your time.
Yeah, I think hopefully I can bring that experience to the adoption world, and sort of see if I can work with lots of other people in the field who are brilliant and will want to campaign and try and get the change we want to see.
Yeah,
because in some ways this is comparable to 2008, 2009, when it was clear that there was probably going to be a Conservative government coming in after many years of a Labour government. And I know that Adoption UK worked really hard to develop relationships with the what they anticipated to be the new incoming government, which is a delicate issue. It's not. You're making judgment calls, but then that led to a kind of probably a decade of influence. Would you say, Scott? A decade where Adoption UK was absolutely had its feet
well under the table,
massively under the table.
Yeah.
Whereas to a point now, 10 years on, it doesn't feel the same. I was at a meeting recently, the supporting family links meeting, and I thought, there's no one from AUK here. And I thought, wow, that's weird. So I just said I was from AUK. No, I didn't.
Give him a hat and a badge, and he's off.
Yeah, I got my AUK pen and waved it. And I just thought that is, but that's really difficult, isn't it? Because it's just such a different environment to then not arrest that slide, but to bring you back to the table. And that feels like a big ask for you as a CEO of after a decade of a lot of attention, really. So I do admire you for taking the job, I'll be honest with you.
Well, I think it's really important to see care. I've said this before, but I do think it's important to see care experience as a continuum. And I think as a sector, potentially the care sector isn't that good at kind of lobbying together. So I think maybe in the disabled children sector, there's lots of different charities that have lots of different sort of angles, but they work really closely together to kind of say, actually, we need more funding for this area generally. We need more focus, more attention. And I think we could potentially do more of that as a kind of a, adoption charities, kinship charities, charities that work with care leavers. Because then we can make the case, because actually, no matter which sort of legal route of permanence that you've gone through, early childhood trauma, experience of having to go away from your birth family or birth parents in case of kinship is traumatic, and a lot of the same things are impacting, like the same experiences of education, the same lack of access to mental health care when it's needed. So we could all be campaigning for the same things together. So that's kind of where I want to go with our lobbying.
Yeah, and I think that, I'm experiencing that a lot at the moment with the kind of FASD kind of community. It harks back to, I worked for Adoption UK 2014 to 2019. And in the early days, it was very kind of, it wasn't that nobody was working together, it was just they were very fearful of working together, because actually what was in it? It was a very tough time financially in the adoption sector. And I mean, very, very tough. But eventually, I think the relationships that were being built, and also the like Al said, the kind of influence that Adoption UK were having in the corridors of power really helped to kind of bring these communities together. And I don't think we should underestimate the value of relationships, the relationships that you build to be able to do that. And I think that that's probably one of the most important factors. Is that your kind of take on it?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's really important to build relationships in order to persuade people to do what you want them to do. I think you have to be really specific about what you want as well, and quite strategic about it, and not try and do too many things.
Which a lot of people do. Let's face it. I was telling Al off yesterday for that, actually. I said, you'll end up with a heart attack, man. The amount of things that you stick your finger into.
Lots of fingers, lots of pies. I guess that means that you're sidling up to Labour politicians, does it? Are you kind of... you can't possibly
ask that. The corridors are powered. Well, I think it's really important when you're trying to campaign for something that you talk to all the parties. So we'll be sidling up to all the politicians and trying to get them to recognise the importance of adoption
that was a great answer, wasn't it? That was a great answer. Oh man, you're on fire.
But the thing is, I think it's a great time to be doing that sort of thing as well, because you like you said, the care review. There's a number of MPs who are really interested in the care sector, the adoption sector. So there are people who are interested in it. We had Helen Hayes on a couple of months ago. We had the previous minister on, who left a week later. Again. But these are the people. People think because they're not making the massive changes that you want to see as a individual who's living with that, but they've got 100 and other million priorities, but they are interested. That's my impression from them anyway. They are interested and they do want to try at least, but it's not just their decision to make some of these changes.
Yeah, and I think, it doesn't help when there's been a lot of other big stuff going on, and that makes it hard, cost of living and COVID and that kind of thing, Brexit before that, there's been a lot of things on the political agenda, and that makes it hard to get change.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So we saw this week, sorry, were you going to ask something now?
No, go for it.
No, I was just going to say that we saw this week about the apology from Wales. So, assuming that you've got something to say on that. I don't know why I said it like that.
Wow.
I mean,
you're on fire, Scott.
I know I am. They're just flowing out tonight.
Today's on the call phone. They need you to stand in tomorrow.
We've now got 50% of the nations who've apologised for the historical kind of issues with adoption, and
Has Northern Ireland apologised?
I don't think so.
Good question. I don't know.
No.
There's the situation there with the government and
yeah, or the lack of one. The lack of one. Yeah. Again. So, I mean, where do you see that heading next? Do you see that heading to England? Because it's been on the agenda, hasn't it? Do you think that'll ever happen, or is it just one of those things that's just going to get?
They did put out a sort of statement, which was not well received, I think. So I feel that there might be a sense that I don't know. I can't speak for the English government there, but I was at not the official apology this week, but I was at the meeting where the Deputy Minister in Wales made her own personal apology. It was really moving. It was at an event that we'd organised, the Big Adoption Conversation, which is a big event in Wales where everyone talks about all the different aspects of adoption. And hearing that was really, really, I felt kind of privileged to be able to hear that, and I think it was a really important moment. And I don't think it can ever make up for what happened. To either birth parents or first parents or the people who were affected as babies and who are now adults. But I think it was right that the government in Wales have apologised, and in Scotland, and we've called for it to happen in the UK government as well.
Yeah.
Can I ask that, because I think I think it's overdue, but I think from Adoption UK's point of view, people maybe look in and go, "You're a membership organisation or charity," which only dawned on me this week, which is a bit. It's not like I was best friends with Scott for 5 years, who worked for you.
Just shows how much you listened, didn't it?
Well,
were you in charge of the membership, Scott? In fact?
No, I wasn't.
Oh, no, you weren't.
All right, okay.
Thankfully.
Heavens.
Otherwise, I would make it 10 times worse if I had been. Yeah.
Kiss of death. And it just made me think that actually externally, I think that's one of the issues for adult adoptees, is that it's a membership organisation for adopters, and so that feels like reconciling that we're saying, hey, we think you need to apologise for adoption. We group of adopters, and it's kind of, you go, there's a slight disconnect there that we're maybe not getting. Is that complicated, or am I just making it complicated?
I think that there's some people would have the view that adoption's never something that should happen, and I think if you're of that view, then you're not going to be very positive towards an organisation called Adoption UK. I think though that I do think adoption's changed and is changing from the sort of 60s. Adoption now is about trying to find a permanent and a sort of a place where a child who can't live with their birth family can have a good chance in life, and with the right support, that can be the right thing for some children. And so, yes, we're a membership organisation for adopters, but we also do we provide services that are funded separately from our membership. So things like the young people services that we provide, so a membership is an aspect of what we do, but it's not the whole of what we do. And we've launched a membership for adopted people, which is about peer support. It's about creating space for adopted people that's created by adopted people. Because I don't think we're not an organisation which is there to sort of promote adoption. We're an organisation which is campaigning for support for adopted people in childhood and in adulthood, and that's always what we've been about. Really, we're not sort of an adoption agency in that way. We're about coming together and saying we need to connect people, and we need to support people, and we need to change the system.
Do you think, because you gave out your 3 tenets of your three priorities? Do you think that there would ever be a fourth? Excuse me.
Cool.
Apologize. Cool. There'd ever be a fourth sort of tenet where, so I think that I look at adoption, I feel quite complicated about it as an adopted parent of 6 children, and I think that the changes that I would hope are in relation to things like identity, severance of relationship, both in legal terms and in practical physical terms. Is that ever going to be something that you would consider to be part of your agenda? Because I think that I've been in rooms with birth parents and adopted people, adult adoptees, and they've said we all understand that there are times when children should never ever live with birth family, and that there are times when there is no one in that family or community who can care for them or shouldn't care for them. But there remains this ire that actually we've moved to a place now where that severance is the kind of the crux of the issue, really. That do you think that we'll ever Adopting UK would ever pick up that as an issue and try and lobby for an alternative? That was a really long question, wasn't it? It was more of a statement.
A really interesting question as well. I think adoption has changed, and I think adoption is still changing, and I think things like identity are really important, and I think things like letterbox contact need to change. We need to have we need to listen to people who've experienced growing up being adopted to understand the importance, the impact of not understanding your identity and background, and not, the fact that people can't get access to their records. All of these things need to change, and I think so. I think there's a lot in what you said, and there's a lot that needs to change. And I think we need to have really good training and preparation for adopters to make sure that, and we need to change the system to get the right support in place for really good maintaining links with family where it's safe and can happen. So I think it needs to continue to change, and I think we want to be involved in that conversation.
Yeah, because I am conscious that as a membership organisation, your members want you to make the support better, and I get that. There's a really strong voice of this needs to be more effective, more available, more appropriate. But that,
and actually, going back to the beginning of what we said, the report that you mentioned, that I've been really struck by families I've spoken to, people I've spoken to who are just, they're dealing with really, really difficult circumstances because of the impact of trauma, and that's difficult for the child. It's difficult for the family, siblings. That support is so needed. So yeah, that it's really important that's what we're campaigning for. But I think there are other things that we need to push for as well.
Yeah.
I guess it's what your priorities are, isn't it? You need to. Yeah. But I'm sure you've got them. So I have to say I've found it difficult to come up with questions, and the reason I've found it difficult to come up with questions is because of my history with Adoption UK, and it just my memory, how it works. I'm thinking, oh well, you used to do that. Should I ask? No, I won't. So that's why. That's why.
You just want to ask, like, is this where they still keep the staplers?
No, I know, because I know they've moved offices. I know you've moved offices, and I know where you've moved to as well, actually. But
have you?
It's all right. I'm not going to send anything through the post. You're all right. Don't worry.
Good grief.
But no, it's just it's kind of just reminding myself that that's history, and
let it go, Scott. Your
exactly,
therapist said you had to let it go.
Well, it's HR that told me to do that. But anyway, so what's the kind of what's Emily's priority for Adoption UK? Not just in terms of all the stuff that we've talked about, but what is by the time you get to the end of your time at Adoption UK, whether that's in 5 years, 10 years, what's your priority? What is the change that you want to make within the adoption sector, I guess? If you could wave a magic wand, and given you've been doing the job for 6 months only, so you're still new.
I'd like to see us having made a significant impact in terms of the availability of adoption support. I think probably that would be the top thing. So probably it might be around the future of the Adoption Support Fund, what that looks like, how that's built on. I think that probably in terms of the external facing thing, that and or am allowed to that we've changed the way the conversation around education and care experienced children, and trying to think about there's quite a lot of rights and things that you get if you're a looked after child in the education system, and expanding that to children with care experience so that adopted children get those rights too. So in terms of lobbying that, and then in terms of internally, I really want Adoption UK to be a great place to work for everyone who works there, and that people feel really part of a team, one team, and that they are all passionate about what they do, and they're really proud of working for Adoption UK because of the impact that we have for families as well. So,
no, that's nice. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, I'm interested about the Adoption Support Fund comment, because I think that is I think there's a lot of families who've grown up in it or have been adopted into a world where Adoption Support Fund is just there, and it's not just there, is it? And I think that with a change of government and then a spending review, it might disappear.
I think there's I don't want to worry people, but I think that's something we really need to push for to maintain, but also to try and we know it's not perfect as well. There's lots of hurdles people have to go through, and there's a really good report that Adoption UK worked on around the sort of needs for it to things like the fact that you have to reapply for it if it goes over the end of the financial year, things like that just make it harder for families to get the help they need. So but,
it's always been a hot potato, that one, hasn't it? Because it's great to have. And I'm from a family that is down the middle, 50-50 on the use of the ASF. We can't use it now, obviously, because we don't live there. But when we could, my older two children, it wasn't the done thing to look into therapy and all that sort of stuff. So they've grown up just getting on with it. And then child number 3 was one when the ASF was, it was within the year he was placed that the ASF came along. So for him, therapy and that's all there for him. So it's very, there's kind of, I guess there's two lots of ways of doing it, but for it to disappear entirely would just be, a travesty, because we know that, a lot of agencies have skilled themselves up in terms of the support that they provide internally, and they've used ASF to do that, and that's great. But it's still bit of a postcode lottery in terms of what support is available, and that's the issue, isn't it? It's not about the fact that these agencies haven't skilled themselves up and haven't used the money wisely. It's about who's used what for what and where it's available. So
and actually, Adoption Support Fund's not available if you're not in England. So for Wales and Scotland, it's a completely different system.
And Northern Ireland, exactly.
I mean, we could talk till the cows come home about Adoption Support Fund, because I think that there's real dangers that because if we create so much negative press about what needs to change, then the Treasury will then go, well, it's not working, so why bother?
Exactly. As well. I don't want to do that.
I'm not saying you are doing that at all, but I just think that actually we need to. I think it was maybe the second spending review, and there was this conversation a year out going, actually, we need to make the case really clear why this continues, as opposed to just going, oh, it needs to be a bit more this and we need more money. The Treasury need to look after our money, so they need to have a really justifiable case for continuing it. So Let's add that to your inbox.
Your to-do list.
Yeah, and Scott left a pair of skis somewhere in the office, and he's just been desperate to find them. And if you come across them,
skis.
Skis.
We sold them on eBay, Scott. Sorry.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, I've not been on a set of skis since I was about 12 years old. So how I would have left them in Adoption UK's offices, I do not know.
Oh,
I do think I left a mug there, so but anyway, it was a bit of a rude one, so I won't be looking for that back. Yeah, I can't do that.
Yes, probably Emily's now. It's probably this is your new mug. You've got.
And an empty packet of prawn cocktail crisps.
Yes, I know.
Classic.
I do. Yeah, I do enjoy a nice packet of prawn cocktail crisps.
Yeah, a little bird told me that.
Yeah.
Excellent. Emily, we've asked a lot of questions and we've talked about a lot of stuff. Is there anything that you were hoping we would ask you because you wanted to say it?
Good. That's a really good question. I think I wanted to talk about. We've now got a sort of new thing, which I think is really interesting part of what we do. So we've got a sort of psychology and therapy hub within AUK, which I think is a bit of a change, building on our sort of Tessa support that we have been delivering in across the UK, and that's now called Pathways. So that's a kind of an exciting sort of element of what we're doing, and trying to think about what that will mean for the different aspects of what we do, and how I think there's a potential for quite an exciting combination there of kind of psychological sort of therapeutic professional kind of focus, and then a kind of peer support focus, because I think something that we do really well is peer support, where you've got sort of an adopter supporting an adopter, or an adopted person supporting an adopted person who could get it, but bringing in that sort of professional view too. I think there's a really interesting combination of seeing it from different people's perspectives that I'm hoping that we can build on. And the other exciting thing we're doing is the FASD Hub UK. So excited that we can hang out with FASD Ireland and think about, promoting understanding of FASD, which is more prevalent than the conditions like autism and ADHD, but really not known about. So you guys are doing a great job about promoting that, but we're excited to sort of see where that goes as well.
Yeah, it does seem like it's I mean, for me anyway, obviously running an organization related to FASD, it's another thing on top of something else, but it's very different in Ireland, given the history and stuff like that. But it's great to see that there's support there available in the UK. I do wonder, I mean, can I ask you about that then? So and this isn't me wanting any insider knowledge, but because I was there when the hub was first set up, and what was very clear from the beginning was it wasn't just adoptive families that needed that support, and that's certainly our experience. So do you feel like that's something that's a long-term thing for Adoption UK to keep going with, or do you think that it's something that in time you may have to think about? Is FASD Hub UK a separate entity to Adoption UK? Because we know there's a little bit of a kind of stigma attached to the adoption piece. Do you think that's the case, or do you think it would just, it's just something that you're just going to continue on with?
I hope it's something we'll continue to do, because there's such need for it. And actually, we also in Scotland, we're providing a kinship care advice service. So it's not the only thing that we do that's not just adoption. So I think, and the boundaries aren't always that clear, are they? So I've spoken to adopters who are also kinship carers of grandchildren, or potentially even sort of birth family, because their children have had their children taken into care. So recognizing, as I've kind of come back to before, that children with care experience can have similar needs in lots of different settings. Like somebody could have FASD in a birth family, or in kinship care arrangements, or an adoptive family. So I think I'm hopeful it's something that we will continue to focus on.
I just see it getting big and big. Do you know what I mean? Like it's almost one of those kind of things that is just growing legs everywhere, isn't it? We're seeing so much more. Maybe I'm seeing more of it because I work in it. I don't know. I don't know. I'm just
I'm just reflecting that that's the same here. But but I think it's one of those things that just hasn't been the awareness before, and that's growing now, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
Well, we're on the hour, Emily. You've survived the hour.
Time is up.
Well,
oh no, time's not up. I mean, we could chat for ages.
Oh, we've only
paid. We're only paying you for an hour, so
yeah,
you're paying me.
No, we're not paying you. I take that back. I take that back.
We will pay you in good publicity and nice words on the internet.
Yeah.
Just that.
Always.
It's lovely.
Always, yeah. And we won't tag you in the post about the podcast. That's how we'll pay you, by not putting your personal Twitter feed on.
I think that's fair.
That is fair. Emily, it's been fantastic to chat to you, and I think that I really do. I kind of admire your pluck, in the sense that it feels like it's not the job I would have taken at this moment. A job in kinship, yeah, but I think you've got a real determination. But I think you've got the skills, and I'm sure you'll do a great job. And I'm sure our paths will cross.
I think adoptive people, adopters need people to be campaigning more than ever. I think now.
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah, and we will probably speak to you again at some point.
I hope so.
This isn't just a one thing in your career kind of thing. You'll have us more than once, I'm sure.
Yeah, you need your annual appraisal and your
my report card.
Yeah. Report card. You could bring your mum and dad in. That would be great. We're not even joking. So, Emily, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate you coming out of an evening as well, and sort of putting yourself in front of us with no real we didn't give you any questions beforehand, so there was no collusion, and just being game really and willing to answer our questions. So much appreciated.
Thank you,
and for ribbing us as well. Well done. You get extra points for that one. Yeah,
you do. Got to push back. Excellent.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.